Hello, this is Felice Picano. I'm moderating a panel called Mirror Mirror, Our Lives, writing about our lives as LGBT people. And I have Darry, David Swatling, Stacia Seaman, Aurora Ray, and Ann Shade here.
Hello.
Hey. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction. Too many years ago, I edited and published through my gay person, Seahorse Press, an anthology titled A True Likeness, Lesbian and Gay Writing Today. That was 1980. It was filled with poetry, short stories, novel excerpts, even 2 short plays. Today, I'd like to add more capital letters to the title of LGBT. Or it was actually lesbian and gay. I'd like to add more of that, and more writers of more gender. But that was a start at letting men read women and women read men, and to get to know each other's work a little. That was very rare at the time. Our 2 live readings were at the famed lesbian bookstore called 3 Lives and Company in New York City over 2 snowy March evenings. And they were so well attended and they became so popular that people have told me that that's what kicked off gay and lesbian and transsexual and bisexual and multiple gender people doing live readings. So that's the beginning. I'm hoping that we can enlarge on that whole idea a little bit more. So the first person I'm going to talk to or ask to speak to us is Aurora Ray. Hi, Aurora, in the country. She's a college dean by day, award-winning lesbian romance author. Rest of the time, except when she's cooking, baking, riding the tractor, or pining for goats. Any in particular?
Well, you know, the little ones you can put in pajamas, obviously.
Okay. She grew up in a small town in South Louisiana, daydreaming about New England. She's the author of the Cape End romance series and several standalone contemporary lesbian romance novels and novellas. Since our panel is about representation, Aurora asked why representation matters, and besides queerness, what we aim to represent in our stories.
Sure.
So, yeah, talk at us.
You know, I think the more and more we see diverse representation in books and film and stories, it's how a lot of us learn to see that our identities are valid, that they matter, that we're not alone, and that we're not limited. And I think diverse stories across kind of all genres really matters. I think as someone who writes queer fiction, I really aim, I tend to write lesbian romance, but I try to identity, whether it's bisexual characters, poly characters, transgender characters. But I think there's some other things that we can sort of choose to represent, whether it's, for me, body image is really important, body positivity is really important, and so that's something I try to weave into my stories. I think without writing something that comes across or feels like a political statement, we can craft characters and tell stories that shine a spotlight on the things and the issues and the identities that matter to us.
Good. So when you first started reading gay and lesbian material, did you think it represented you particularly, and your friends in your circle?
Sure. It's interesting. Like, I've been a romance reader my whole life. I didn't discover queer romance until I was in my early 30s, which seems a little bit shocking to me in hindsight. I had read other kind of queer fiction and literature, but not the sort of romance genre. And so discovering it was really, really exciting. Seeing women loving women stories was really kind of a positive experience for me. And I think I did get to see myself in ways that I hadn't. And lovely things about the explosion of queer fiction and publishing houses like Bold Strokes is that we can tell, even within, say, lesbian romance, there's this huge swath of possibility in terms of interests, identities, gender expressions, sexual expressions. And so I think the more that we're publishing, I think my books sort of occupy its own little niche, and I think a lot of my fellow authors here, lesbian or otherwise, their stories sort of take up a space that isn't covered somewhere else. And I think that's really exciting for readers to be able to have so much to pick from.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. And I noticed your bio just fell right off of what I have here. So I'm going to ask you to give your bio. But I know you wanted to talk about representation in our literature. And I used to teach at Antioch University, LA, and I was teaching a course called Gay and Lesbian Literature today. And the first book that we began with, mostly because it's such a great book, was Zombie by Audre Lorde. And do you know that book, or do you know Audrey's work?
Yes, I'm familiar with it. I just recently started reading her work, and Zombie's actually on my reading list. Representation is important to me, and it's been for some time, even before I started writing lesbian romance. I was still doing romance, but I did all my characters and all my writing are African American characters, and I was doing historical, which I'm very, very big on my history and my culture. So I try and incorporate that into my writing without being teachy or preachy at all, but make it to the story. And when I started writing lesbian fiction, I felt it was still important because as with the Aurora, I started reading very late, lesbian fiction very late in life. Maybe about 10, 15 years ago. So I was in my early 40s, late 30s, and the romance for African American lesbian romance is very, how do I say it, very urbanized, and very generalized. It's not, it doesn't have that slow burn, that sweet romance that it's either erotic or it's thug street romance. And I'm not saying all of it's like that, because there's some great writers out there, but they're few and far between in the African American community with that particular genre. Right. So that's why it's representation important to me, because I didn't see myself in any of those books. I didn't see strong, independent, successful Black women. I saw street thugs. I saw gangsters, hookers, and just utter sex, and that's it. There's no romance in it. So that's why it was important to me.
What kind of responses have you gotten? Have you gotten mail or email or reviews? And what were those like?
Yes, I've gotten. This is my first book with Bold Strokes. My previous book I self-published. I actually had a young woman write to me saying it, and that this one touched me really much, that it gave her the courage to speak out and to come out of the closet and to be honest with their parents, because my character in that book was coming out of the closet later in life after a divorce. So it gave her the courage to speak up and do what she needed to do. I've also gotten thank yous for representing us in such a positive light, in such a warm light. And the person that actually inspired me to do such things has also, been writing me and thanking me for, taking the step that I was too afraid to do before, but finally did, I'll say about 10 years ago. So.
What's your current book?
My current book is Femme Tales. It is, there are 3 novellas wrapped into one whole book. They are based on fairy tales, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, and Cinderella. And the characters are all African-American female characters, lesbian characters. It's a contemporary book. So that's my current one.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're moving to Eden, who said, my latest novel is Vanished. Eden Darry is a freshly minted resident of Kent, beautiful part of England. Having previously been a lifelong Londoner, with a partner and no pets yet. Has 3 novels published with Bold Strokes Press, House, Vanished, which we heard about, and Zito. So you asked if you could talk about the representation of women as heroes in horror and supernatural novels and why that's important. You said G, but I think it's important to all of us. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, so I guess the genre I want to read is horror and sort of supernatural and that kind of thing. And obviously, I guess most of that, well, like most people's books, it's all mainstream stuff. And so because of my interest, when I started writing, that was kind of the genre that I wanted to write in. And I really enjoy, I mean, I love romance. I do love romance, but I think there are people, some on this panel, that write that, you know, better than I could. So yeah, I think it's just nice to be able to see women, you know, sort of like fighting off zombies or monsters or going on like quests and that sort of thing. And I know, you know, I suppose in terms of romance, you know, those women are, you know, find strength and get through difficult things. But I guess, yeah, like with more sort of horror books and stuff, it's a very kind of in your face, women fighting physically, you know, sort of trying to.
So the fields you
Sorry, go on.
I was about to say, the field that you write in with your supernatural tales is sort of a fanboy field, isn't it? I mean, it's mostly fanboys who are writing and reading these things.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't actually know. I mean, a lot of the reviews I've had have been sort of from like female readers, but I had a few like guys and stuff. I'm happy for whoever wants my books to read them. Yeah.
So my other question is, when you're writing these books, do you think about who will play the hero, the heroine in the movie or the TV series? Because I read some of Vanish and it was very cinematic. And, you know.
Like, I don't. Maybe it's because I also watch quite a lot of films like that as well. So maybe the way I come at it is seeing it in my head. And I don't like always. People always sort of say, don't they? You know, kind of who would play your characters in film. And I don't actually know that many people. If I'm honest, the films I watch are all like old films. I very rarely watch anything new, so I don't even know who anybody is.
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you. David Swatling. Hi, David.
Hi, Felice.
I'm okay today. Okay, here we go. He was 2015 Lambda Literary Award finalist for his debut psychological thriller, the novel Calvin's Head. David grew up in upstate New York, studied theater, and escaped to Amsterdam in 1985 when it was an escape. He produced arts and culture programs for Radio Netherlands, co-hosted a weekly Amsterdam LGBTQ radio show, and is a 3-time winner of National Lesbian and Gay Journalist Association Awards. And Calvin's Head, David said, is my only book which I read, still working on a sequel. So tell me about representation and what you think of that with representation.
Well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, I read a lot growing up. I read all kinds of things, all kinds of genres, just anything that came along. And it wasn't that I didn't see myself, because I didn't have anything to gauge that on. I had no vocabulary for what was going on in my head, especially I'm thinking in high school. The only things that I read that were sort of gay related was plays, The Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman and Tea and Sympathy by Robert Anderson, neither one of which had a particularly positive portrayal of being gay. If that's what it was hardly even named. So it wasn't until probably, I'm going to say mid-'80s, when David Levitt wrote The Lost Language of Cranes, which was about the same time I was coming out, and that was a coming out novel, that I suddenly kind of put the two things together in terms of, you know, reading a story that I actually sort of saw myself in. But I kept thinking thinking about this because a few years later, it was in the early 90s when I was working at Radio Netherlands with an international group of very smart journalists, and we would have these great lunchtime conversations. And I remember one day bringing up at the table that I had read this story that the Robin Hood Society in Nottingham, where this festival usually takes place, were very upset because an academic had come out with a paper that had gotten a great deal of press that Robin Hood was actually gay. He was more interested in his merry men than Maid Marian, because Maid Marian wasn't even put into the story for 200 years to like macho him up a bit. And one of my colleagues sort of frowned and said, "Oh, what does it really matter?" And I said to her, well, what matters is if I had been growing up with that kind of a story, to have the vocabulary and the sense of what my thoughts were, that I wasn't the only one, that I wasn't insane, that might have been really positive for me. And I think that's a really important part of representation, and especially the way it's come out these days, where I really admire the diversity of literature that's coming out now. It doesn't so much have to do with what I write, but what everybody's writing. The fact that they just came out with the list of the 10 top banned books in America, which is done by libraries, and 8 out of the 10 were gay and lesbian themed books, LGBTQ.
One of mine involved?
No, nor one of mine. But I did just read the top one, which has been on 2 years in a row, a Lambda Award winner, a Stonewall winner, about a trans kid in middle school who wants to play Charlotte in the play of Charlotte's Web that her class is doing, but she's not allowed to audition for Charlotte because she's a boy.
Right.
It's a beautiful little story, and it's like, oh, I think even though it's bad that 8 out of 10 of those books are LGBT themed and are on the banned list, what's great is that there are so many books that they can be on that list, that they're in libraries, that kids are getting their hands on them, and that their parents are finding them, and they're getting all in a flurry. But I think it's a really positive sign in one way that the representation is growing now.
What about representation of our age group? 2 of us have gray hair here. And what about...
I'm not the only one on the panel today.
That's gray hair, Stacia?
I have my Bonnie Raitt streak.
Oh, okay. Okay, so 3 of us have gray hair. What about representation of people of our age in LGBT literature? And I know in romance it might be a little sticky, but and this is open to all of you to discuss. But what about representation? Would you think about writing about someone your age?
Yeah.
Me personally?
How about Anne says yes.
I don't want to take away from David's time.
No, let's go.
Jump right in.
Please talk. Yeah.
I am currently working on, and I'm not sure if it would be called coming of age, of a character who is my age, but I'm starting with her life when she was 14 and kind of working my way up from 14 to 55, and having, going through 10 years of her life, of her, trying to figure out who she is and her sexuality and how that affects her life. But she technically doesn't come out until she's later on, until she's an adult. And she finds true romance then. So I'm finding it interesting, writing from someone from my perspective. But I think it's important that people people our age see something written for them, and written for them in a romantic light, so that they don't give up and say, oh, well, I'm this old now, so there's no way I'm going to find love, because it is possible.
Anyone else?
Seaman, I think it's really interesting to write characters throughout kind of different stages of life. I'm in my 40s now, and I'm not sure characters in their sort of like mid-20s feel super resonant with me at this point. But certainly characters like, from their 30s, the book I have coming out in October, both protagonists are 50, and they've both been married and divorced. One has college-age children. And so I think I think if you're writing, I mean, as someone who writes romance, I think getting to explore the ways that kind of love can happen at all different stages of someone's life is really interesting. I think if I was only writing people in their late 20s or early 30s who were, you know, really just finding the love of their life for the first time, it would start to feel a little bit redundant. And so I think seeing that, and as someone who is, you know, creeping more quickly than I would maybe like through middle age, like, I think that's really important.
Good. The reason I asked is because in 1995, 1996, I published a very popular gay novel called Like People in History. And people have been asking for a sequel to it for years and years. And just recently I said, if I'm going to do that, the guys are going to be in their 70s. Right? If I have to follow it, would you read that book, you know? And so I'm actually sort of playing with it, playing with the sequel. And for example, two of the people from the earlier book who have remained together, they now have a gerontologist. And they're very happy about that fact. It's something brand new that their children can't have. So, I mean, all kinds of things are possible. Stacia, you see so much literature coming through your hands as one of the most wonderful editors at Bold Strokes Press. Also co-editor with Radcliffe and Sandy of the anthologies Girls on Campus, Girls Next Door, Myth and Magic, which are queer fairy tales, and my own favorite of these books, Women of the Dark Street. I just really love that. Stacia Seaman says she plays with other people's words. On a good day, she's a super spy or a firefighter. On a not so good day, she reviews pronunciation keys for ESL vocabulary lists and remarks that's harder than you can think. As Radcliffe's co-editor, she's won a Lammy and several Goldies. So talk to us about representation the way you see it from your point of view, which is very important to all of us. We're authors. You're an editor.
Well, first, I wanted to mention that from my perspective, there's another layer of representation, which is preserving the voices of authors and of characters. And that's changing. For example, pronouns. In the past, we were very, copy editors were taught to be very strict about the use of pronouns, and that's just, I am now still very strict about the use of pronouns, but it's the way the author wants them, the way the character wants them. You know, using they, using any number of pronouns that didn't exist when I was trained as an editor. Using vernacular English, for example, that didn't used to be used or that was flattened into contemporary standard American language. So especially as younger readers are demanding that, they not be flattened into a, I don't know, societally expected view of things. It's getting more interesting to be an editor. There's so much more to learn these days for us. And that's really, for me, fantastic, because so much of editing is you're supposed to know the answers, and I don't know them. Our writers know them, their characters know them, and it's been wonderful to learn so much over the last few years as there's this explosion of gender identities and ages and social economic backgrounds in our books. And we need to make those real. We as editors need to make sure those stay real and don't get muted, I guess.
As an editor, I've edited a couple of anthologies. It's not the easiest job in the world.
No.
And until you've done one, you don't know what it's like. But I wanted to ask you about when you're editing these anthologies, what kind of representation are you looking to include? How much and how different and how important is that? And when you're selecting the stories or the excerpts that are going in there?
I'm not always on the selection end of things. And a lot of the time, my big challenge is left with ordering the stories in a way that makes sense, in a way that produces a flow. And part of it comes down to, how many green-eyed redheads do you have? How many as main characters in anthologies, which happens a lot in lesbian fiction, and how many stories do you have that are kind of the same that you need to spread out through the anthology so that you're not getting back-to-back stories that are too similar? And how do you maintain, in a novel, pacing is really important, but it's also important in anthology. And so how do you order the stories in a way that creates a sense of flow, but that also highlights everything, because you don't want to, bury a story somewhere in the middle of an anthology when maybe it should be up front, or maybe it should be the last thing that people remember. And I don't think, but yeah, to answer your question, I'm not always on the acquisitions end of anthologies as much.
Mm-hmm.
And when I am, you do want to have new voices as much as you have well-known voices. And you want them to be representative of your theme, but you want them to you want them to interpret it in a new and fresh way. You don't want all of the stories to be the same. And you just have to be very broad-minded, because what you have as the vision for the anthology, once you actually start getting submissions, authors might really expand that in a new and different way that you'd never thought of. And that's an amazing part of reading the submissions, I think.
Right. So you don't have a standard like, I need one African American, one Asian American, one older, one younger, one YA, nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's just the quality of what comes into you. Is that right?
The quality and how it fits. You can have an absolutely fantastic story that just doesn't fit.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking and it's horrible, but sometimes you just have to tell the author, this is a great story and somebody's going to publish it, but this isn't where it's going to be.
Okay. So I wanted to ask Eden a question. And I'm going to go back to what I was talking about before a little bit, because I have found that as a sci-fi writer, where I discuss gender very importantly, and sometimes in very strange ways, I find that some of the readers who open up the book because someone's told them this is a terrific sci-fi novel are then horrified to find, for example, a technological matriarchy in which men are third-class citizens, which is true in my Dry Land's End. And they write these tortured Amazon.com book reviews. Have you encountered anything like that yourself?
I'm very lucky. I haven't yet. I mean, most of, I guess, the books I write, they're very much kind of set in the world as it is now, and the structures that we have now. So I suppose there's nothing particularly sort of surprising or shocking for people in that. It's more rather kind of what goes on once they're like in these seemingly normal worlds. Like everyone vanishes vanished in the house. They move into a haunted house where there's a ghost. And then in the new one, which is out in October, D-Town, it's the town is full of zombies. So no, I've been spared, I think, those reviews, fortunately. Long may it continue.
Okay, so David, tell us about your new book. It's a sequel to Calvin's Head, is that right?
Yes. The one taking a very long time to come, but that's a completely different story altogether. I've taken the same main characters, Decker and Calvin, the homeless pair in the first book, and I've transported them to the northern New Hampshire, the White Mountains. He goes back, he visits an old college friend who runs an inn up there that was built in the middle of the 19th century and appears to be perhaps haunted. And so there will be a whole bunch of new characters. There's the ghosts of the inn are perhaps related to the Civil War. So there's a Civil War thread that goes through it. And that's kind of fun research because I love that period. And Walt Whitman makes a little cameo appearance at the very beginning. And yeah, I didn't want to write another crime serial killer novel. It seemed weird to use the same main character and have wherever he went, a serial killer popped up. And I think my life has gone through such incredible different changes. So I thought, well, let's just change genres as well as everything else and go with a ghost story. And which is interesting for me because the place where I stay in the summers is an inn in New Hampshire, and there are ghost stories that surround that inn. I'm quite cynical about them, and I must say I've never heard more than a creaky old building late at night, which doesn't really scare me, except for that occasional marching band in the distance. And I don't know what that is. I go looking for it, and I can't find it. But I'm a kind of a cynic, so I think writing a ghost story from a cynic's perspective is a good way to start as well.
That's terrific. Yeah, I agree with that. So representation in general, do we have a responsibility as LGBT writers and editors to write about people that we are not? And where does that line get blurry? Because the reason I'm asking this, and actually I'm with particular interest to Anne Shade's books, there have been gay Black writers who have crossed over markets. Do you think your books could cross over into the mainstream? No.
Into mainstream?
Yeah, into mainstream. Yeah.
I can only hope.
What would it take? What would it take within the material that you're working with?
It's an interesting question because Rad actually spoke about this in the previous session. I think it would take more open-mindedness, which I don't think is possible within the community, for LGBTQ books to become mainstream and be mixed in on the shelves. It would be great if my romance books were just romance and not lesbian romance or LGBTQ romance. But unfortunately, I don't think and that's probably sounding very pessimistic, which I'm not a pessimistic person. I don't think it's going to reach that level anytime soon. It will eventually, I'm sure. But I think today it's not going to do that, and it's unfortunate. But I kind of like being in my own little clique. I like having our community because it's more supportive this way. If we were kind of mixed in with everybody else, then, those lesbian sci-fi fans or horror fans wouldn't get Eden's books. Those romance fans wouldn't get Aurora's books, which are awesome. So they wouldn't find them as easily because they'll be mixed in with the regular romance. So unless you know who we are, unless you know us by name, our books, it'll be more difficult to find us.
Okay, anybody else have a statement to make about that? Okay, what about brand names? Aurora, Eden, and what about you becoming brand names? And I don't mean with T-shirts and.
I want T-shirts.
Although, I mean, that's also possible. I mean, we live in a world where branding, because I have been told that I'm a brand. I've actually had a publisher say, well, we're sort of interested in your brand, I was thinking, what about my books? You know, so what do you think about the whole idea of branding? You know,
I think I was resistant
generalization
at
of the
first.
world. Go ahead.
I mean, I think a lot of us, you know, the sort of commercialization of it and the idea that we have this like little locked in brand can be off-putting, but I've really come to embrace it because I think it's not that you can never stray from it, but it sort of gives readers kind of a cohesive idea. Like a really good brand has a known consistent message, like you know what you're going to get. And I think, you know, someone who almost always has food being a primary, it's like I think there's something to be said for creating a brand, and it doesn't have to be a singular sort of niche, but it gives readers something to sort of identify and go with. I think Anne's point about kind of that push and pull of wanting to be mainstream, wanting to be included on the romance shelves, like there's something to be said for that, but it's also really easy to get lost in the shuffle. And I think as queer publishing expands, that's going to be something that we have to contend with as well. And so I think having a little bit of an identity or a brand that readers can sort of remember, recognize, and sort of know what they're going to get when they buy your books is really powerful and can be really helpful in connecting with readers.
Right. Stacia, Radcliffe is the brand, isn't she?
Oh, heavens, yes.
Yes, probably is. So you're very close to this, and you know what I'm talking about.
I am brand adjacent, yes.
Yeah. So you want to talk about those for a minute?
No, but I mean, I think this is where pen names kind of come into play.
Okay.
Where you have your brand, but you can also have sort of alter egos within that brand, you know, like Nora Roberts and J.D. Robb. So everybody knows it's the same person, but you know that with Nora Roberts, you're getting one thing, and with J.D. Robb, you're getting something else. And I think that's more the brand that Radcliffe kind of has with her L.L. Rand alter ego. And I think some of our other writers are doing that as well. And not sure who they are, but it is interesting working with somebody like that. It's kind of scary, actually. It's a little intimidating.
Very
Can I just say that I think the whole idea of branding, I think, is very important in terms of marketing, and it's looking at what we write from a marketing perspective. But personally, the only brand I ever want is you won't expect the same thing from me again, except I hope it will be good. But I don't want to write the same story over and over again. I was this way when I was doing radio work. If I was doing a series for too long, I stopped it and started something brand new. Every week it was different. And somebody once said, well, you should tell people at the beginning of your program what the program is going to be about. I said, no, I want them to be surprised. And if that limits me in terms of an audience, so be it. I'm very used to small audiences. I've performed for 2 people in an audience once. That doesn't bother me at all. What I want to keep it exciting. I want to keep it engaged and energetic for me, and that means doing different things. So I think I'm kind of anti-brand.
Right.
For
so
me.
The two of you brought up an interesting point, which is that you can expand a lot once you have a brand name, but you're also limited in many other ways, and you can't really go anywhere with that. Well,
some writers probably like that. I mean, someone said today at an earlier panel that, you know, they're romantic, they love romance, and that's all they want to write. And that's great, that's fantastic, you know. But each of us have a different take on how our creative art works.
Right. Okay. So I'm seeing that the chat room has a lot of people in it. Let's see if we can get one of them. Okay. And many participants. Q&A, we have one question.
It's coming in from Emily Metcalf, and the question is, I find it difficult to find positive bi plus representation in books. Do you have any thoughts on this or other identities, minority groups that you think need to be represented more?
This is Greg, who wants to talk about this.
One community that needs a lot more representation, well, more than one community, are asexuals, aromantics. They're vanishingly rare in fiction, and need representation. People who identify as ace and need to see themselves in books, and with very rare exceptions, they're not. So I'll throw that out.
What are, Anne?
Well, as a bisexual queer woman, I understand what she's saying. One of my writings, I actually put not only a bi woman, but I also put a trans woman. It was the main character's cousin who was her support system, because I thought it was important to represent someone at that time. I haven't seen too many. I'm interested in possibly writing a novel with a main character who is trans. I'm like David. I'm kind of anti-brand, where I don't want to be in that little bubble and just write one type of genre, one type of character. I think it's important that we're all represented. When you have a rainbow, you don't have just one color, you have all the colors. So I think it's important that we're all represented in that light.
I find that male bisexuals are very badly represented, both in straight literature, non-gay literature, and in gay literature. And I've known several bisexual men for 50, 60 years, and that no one like them has been represented in our literature yet. I'm still waiting for that to happen. When bisexuals show up, bisexual men show up, they're generally villains, and they're doing horrible things to everyone around them. And that's not the case all the time,
I have a question about that. But he's not really the villain, but he's definitely the antagonist in the book I'm working on now. In his past, he has been with men, he has been with women. However, his real relationship is more with the dead than the living. And I'm having a little bit of a problem at the moment, though. Do I send him toward this guy, or do I send him toward this woman? Or because I'm thinking, am I going to get criticized by bisexuals for writing, as you say, a poorly written bisexual character? It's just I'm using to service the plot more than anything else. Any help?
So Catherine Nicholas said to all of them, make him Polly. That would be one way of doing it. The other way, of course, the dead don't complain usually, unless all of those creaking doors are actually the dead, and they are complaining about what you're planning. There are more questions. Anybody else? Can anybody read these questions beside me? Or
Do any of you use sensitivity readers when you are writing your? Sorry, it's cut off there. When you're writing your books, I don't use sensitivity readers. I think so up till now, my characters have been. I don't actually know if I've actually said whether they're gay or bi or what, but they are women who are with women. But I think that if I ever did, for example, the one I'm writing now, I have as a secondary character a trans character, and he's kind of more and more becoming like my favourite character. So I'm thinking that if I go too much further with him, then I probably will need one, because I'm not trans, and I would hate to offend anybody when that is sort of the opposite of what I would be looking to achieve. So yeah.
we have room for one more question. Can anyone read the third one? Is there a third question there? What I'm saying? No?
Is it the one from Jen Stewart? Did you just read that one, Eden?
No, that's a new one.
Do you find it easier to write about characters that reflect you, or do you like to write about others to give them more representation? Or are you scared you will misrepresent them?
Yeah. Anybody want to address that? I love writing about it. And?
It's good to write in diverse characters. Like Eden said, you would want to, if there's a specific type of character that you're writing about that you're not familiar with because you're not living that life, it is good to talk to someone who is familiar with that life so that you're making sure you get that character in the correct light without misrepresenting them and without being biased towards their group. But I think it's important to represent all types of characters in my writing.
Good. Anyone else? Aurora?
I think it's a really delicate balance. I think it's really important to write diverse characters, and at the same time, I think it's really important to sort of not presume to speak for communities and cultures that aren't yours. And I think, I try really hard to not write all cis white lesbian characters because that's not an accurate reflection of the world, and I think it does a real disservice to the diversity of our communities. But I think at the same time, we have to acknowledge the problem that authors and voices of underrepresented groups, people of color, trans people, disabled people, I think we need to have a commitment to write about diverse people with sensitivity and with integrity, but we also need to amplify the voices of those sort of own voice writers who are often really marginalized. Okay,
so this is a general question. When you do something like that, and I do it all the time, I think the further a person is, the better a character I can get, and the representative person I can get. Are you afraid of criticism from that particular community that people may think that you've misrepresented?
I don't think it's necessarily like fear of like a backlash. For me, it's more fear of doing something that is insensitive or wrong. Or, for example, in my first novel, one of my characters was a woman of colour, and I was really scared writing her because I'm quite clearly not a woman of colour. And I was quite conscious when writing it not to really go into anything because I know nothing about it. Like I said, I'm lucky in as much as because my stories are pretty much focused on things trying to kill them. But yeah, there's always a fear, and like I said, it's not necessarily fear of what other people will have a go at you for. It's doing something that could upset somebody, which is just the furthest from my intention. And also, yeah, there is a question, isn't there? Like, as a white woman, should I be writing people that aren't, that are of colour, because that's not who I am. So I find it's a difficult one. I find it difficult really to sort of think about and really know what is right.
I think it should be able to make your characters better and stronger if you're really thinking about it, and really, as opposed to just writing, oh, I've got this character and it's an African-American character and I'm just going to write that, as opposed to really thinking about what it means to be that character and making that character as true as the character that may be based on you and your inner self. Make that character as important and as true as your own inner self.
I agree. I think it's important if you're a non-African American person writing an African American character, I think it's you're writing about that character and that person. So you're giving that person personality. So it's not necessarily that she's African American. She's a person, but she's of African American race. But she's still able to kill whatever has to be killed.
Yeah.
And
Which is because that's what I did, and then I was thinking, but I haven't actually addressed that to what, and I'm thinking, I don't want to because I don't know anything about it. But so in the end, I just had just basically. Yeah,
it's not even important sometimes to address her race because she's doing what needs to be done to help the world.
Yeah.
So Stacia, as an editor, does that question come up when you're editing books?
Yeah, it does. Because you want characters to be authentic, not tokens. Do you
make suggestions?
I do, but again, I'm not a woman of color either, and so I can say this doesn't ring true, this doesn't seem authentic, but I can't tell them always how to fix it. That's got to come from somebody who can actually tell them what lived experience could contribute to creating this character.
Just make her a badass.
Exactly. That's what I'll say from now on. Just make her a badass. I don't care if she's a barista. Make her a badass.
There you go.
Thank you all. We've got to sign off now. And I really had fun. Enjoy your day. David, Aurora, and Stacia, Eden. Bye.
Great seeing you all. Bye.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
Hi, thanks everyone.